When the CIA hired a psychic during the Cold War, they did not expect the moon to enter the story.
Neil and Buzz were on the lunar surface. Neil switched to the medical channel and spoke directly with the chief medical officer, saying, "They're here, they're parked on the side of the crater, they're watching us."
In the 1970s, Ingo Swann was asked to remote view the far side of the moon under a secret program later called Stargate. What he claimed to see went far beyond craters and dust.
I am not this body in terms of consciousness, and consciousness can go places where the body cannot.
Swann described structures, machines, and non-human figures watching him back.
It needs to keep it sound counter spacey, doesn't it? Do you hear that? That whistling sound?
Decades later, CIA files released in 2006 confirmed his role. The mystery is what those documents never explain about the moon itself. Ingo Swann, hired by the CIA. In the early 1970s, amid Cold War tensions and a growing obsession within U.S. intelligence circles about unorthodox ways to gain advantage over the Soviet Union, an interesting chapter of espionage quietly began to unfold. Ingo Swann, an American artist and self-described psychic, would soon be pulled into a world far removed from his studio and into the high-stakes, hush-hush realm of government psychic research. While Swann had already attracted interest for his work with parapsychologists at the Stanford Research Institute, it was his potential for remote viewing that caught the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency. This was a claimed ability to perceive distant targets through extrasensory means. By 1972, the CIA had begun sponsoring experiments at SRI under the code name SCANATE, Scan by Coordinate, which would later be called the Stargate Project. The goal? To determine whether psychic phenomena could be harnessed for intelligence gathering. The broader context for this interest was a fear that the Soviet Union was pouring resources into research on psychic power or psychotronics, potentially giving them an unconventional edge. This might sound ridiculous, but it was real to many at the time. SRI researchers Harold Puthoff and Russell Targ were tasked with developing a controlled methodology for remote viewing, and it was Swann's involvement that helped shape this work into something the agency would take very seriously. It wasn't simply curiosity that motivated the CIA. They wanted to use remote viewing as a possible tool to gather information that the standard spy techniques could not. It was a kind of psychic reconnaissance. As Swann became more deeply involved, his work became a part of a classified intelligence program. Analysts and operatives revealed that this initiative was actually the government's way of testing whether we could see distant or hidden locations with the human mind. This was officially consolidated under the name Stargate Project. Over the next 2 decades, Stargate would recruit and train several individuals in remote viewing techniques. At the center of all this was Ingo Swann, and this was not surprising because he had early success in previous experiments. Early success in experiments. From the moment Ingo Swann stepped into a controlled laboratory environment in the early 1970s, his path would diverge sharply from that of most psychical researchers. Before he ever touched government programs like Project Stargate, Swann was participating in early ESP and remote viewing experiments that set the tone for his later work with the CIA and the U.S. Army. In these days of parapsychology exploration, scientists at institutions at Stanford and the American Society for Psychical Research were curious about whether human consciousness could access beyond the reach of the 5 senses. Swann was willing to engage and experiment, and he shocked many researchers with his results. One of the first striking outcomes came in what seems like a simple experiment. Swann was asked to describe objects hidden inside sealed boxes. In a controlled setting where he was monitored with electrodes, he sketched what he saw and noted that an internal light inside a box was broken. When the box was opened later, it turned out that the bulb was actually broken. The result shocked researchers because there was no normal way he would have known this detail. With his early success, they decided to carry out more ambitious tests. In fact, many say that Swan developed coordinate remote viewing, which is a method where a person tries to describe a distant target based purely on numerical coordinates, without using any visual or sensory cues. During the trials, Swan performed well above chance. Experimenters realized that there was something strange about him, and decided to try out his abilities even more. But perhaps the most shocking part of his achievements was in 1973, when Swan and fellow remote viewer Harold Sherman carried out what they called a planetary probe of Jupiter. The planet sits far from Earth, and Swan was given only the target coordinates. With only that, he produced descriptions of Jupiter's atmospheric layers, storms, and even a ring system. They thought they would have to take his word for it, until the Voyager spacecraft observations went out 6 years later and revealed that he was right. With his impressive track record, the U.S. government took Swan's abilities seriously, and that's when the CIA decided to invite him. Meeting Mr. Axelrod. It was February 1975 when Ingo Swan's ordinary life as an artist and occasional parapsychology volunteer suddenly took a turn into the shadows of government secrecy. Swan, already known to some researchers for his work in psychic environments, received a phone call from a highly placed functionary in Washington. The phone call was from someone who hinted that Swan would soon be contacted by a man that they called Mr. Axelrod. This was the start of something shocking, and Swan later described it in his memoir, Penetration. A few weeks after the call, Swan met Axelrod in person, but not in an office or cafe. He was told to go to a specific location in Washington at a specific time, where he was approached by individuals in military-style attire. After being patted down and blindfolded, he was ushered into a waiting car and whisked away, eventually boarding a helicopter without even knowing where he was going. The secret and surreal nature of his transport immediately made Swan realize that this was something way beyond standard scientific research. He was blindfolded, surrounded by operatives, and headed to an unknown facility. Once he got to the secure location, his blindfold was removed, and he found himself face to face with Axelrod, a man who quickly admitted that his name was probably a pseudonym and emphasized the classified nature of the work they were to discuss. Axelrod spoke with a seriousness and precision that was expected from the covert nature of their meeting. He wanted to employ Swan's remote viewing ability for a mission that was sensitive, secretive, and strictly controlled. Swan was told to focus on absolute confidentiality. He would be compensated handsomely, but was bound by agreement not to speak of the project for at least a decade. Behind the scenes, this was all part of what would later be recognized as the CIA's Stargate Project. This was an umbrella for a range of remote viewing and ESP research funded by the agency amid the Cold War fears. So, when the CIA had him under their thumb, they decided to ask him a shocking question. What was on the moon? Moon remote viewing. After he was recruited into the secret government program to explore the unseen with his mind, Ingo Swan was directed to remote view the moon. They didn't want to know about the familiar lunar craters and dust we already know, but the far side that never faces Earth. What he later described in his 1998 memoir Penetrates was nothing like the barren landscape portrayed by NASA. Instead, his imagination filled that distant terrain with activity and anomalies that defied everything scientists believed about our satellite. Given a set of lunar coordinates, Swan settled into a deep, trance-like state, and his consciousness drifted far beyond Earth's atmosphere. At first, he saw the expected features like cliffs, craters, and dunes of white powder that matched what Apollo missions had photographed. But then things took a surreal turn. He started to perceive tracks on the surface that appeared to have been made by tractors or machinery, even though the moon has no wind or weather to create such patterns. Intrigued, he used his mind to move closer and encountered scenes that seemed lifted from science fiction instead of lunar geology. Within a large crater, he believed he saw something that looked like an airfield. It was complete with hangar-like structures, roads, towers, and unexplained machinery. Some rock formations seemed to be unnaturally smooth or cut, as if it was made by heavy earth-moving equipment instead of meteor impacts. Even more bizarre, there were colored lights and diffuse glows emanating from certain structures. This was something Swan interpreted as evidence of atmospheric-like light scattering, even if the moon didn't have a real atmosphere. At one point, he claimed that he saw humanoid figures through windows within these geometric constructs. These strange impressions were only revealed through psychic reconnaissance, and they were different from the standard scientific observations. There was no lunar orbiter, lander, or rover, but there was something more shocking. He claimed to see aliens on the moon. Seeing humanoid beings. As Ingo Swann used his remote viewing work, he could mostly see structures and machinery on the moon, but his psychic projection eventually brought him face to face with beings that seemed to detect him. In Swann's vision of the moon's far side, he described moving closer to what looked like an airfield-like installation with domes, roads, and mechanical activity. As he looked deeper into the crater, something shocking happened. Figures appeared, working in the surface's eerie terrain, as if they were engaged in their own purposeful activity. These weren't amorphous shapes or distant shadows. Swann later wrote in his book that they looked humanoid in form, unclothed, and busily occupied with tasks that resembled mining or excavation. Then came the moment that changed everything. As Swann continued his remote viewing, two of these beings abruptly turned their attention straight toward where his consciousness had projected itself. He guessed that they actually noticed him. In his written reflections, he was wondering how those beings could actually notice his presence on the moon. He asked how they could respond to his mental presence from such immense distances, unless they themselves possessed some form of advanced perception or psychic awareness. When this happened, Swann was visibly shaken, and his handler, Mr. Axelrod, noticed his strange behavior. The session was quickly terminated, abruptly, without explanation, and Swann was pulled back from his remote state. Axelrod reportedly seemed uneasy, almost as if the viewing had crossed a boundary that those directing the project hadn't intended him to reach. Experiencing strange women. After the dust of his classified moon remote viewing, 6 months after his withdrawal from the secret facility, and his abrupt psychic encounter on the far side of the moon, when Swann went about the mundane business of grocery shopping. As Swann wandered the supermarket aisles, his eyes caught someone who seemed utterly out of place in that fluorescent-lit setting. He saw an astonishingly beautiful woman wearing very minimal clothing, only short shorts, a bikini top, and sky-high heels. According to Swann, something in her presence struck him as otherworldly. Rather than simple attraction, he felt a wave of electrical tingling wash through him, compelling him to wonder if this woman was an extraterrestrial being in human guise. Swann was a man used to pushing the boundaries of perception, but even he recognized the interior logic of that thought as bizarre. But at that moment, it seemed like he couldn't convince himself otherwise. Just as the moment became more intense, two men who he later called the twins from the moon mission appeared nearby, watching. Swann's reaction was instant, as he was panicking. He ran from the store, convinced that something more than coincidence was at play. That evening, his phone rang with an instruction he could hardly believe. He was told to fly to New York immediately and wait at Grand Central Station for contact. Once there, Swan encountered one of the twins beside a payphone, and soon after, Mr. Axelrod called, interrogating him about the supermarket incident with intense scrutiny. Axelrod didn't confirm whether the woman was human, alien, or something else. Instead, he warned Swan to stay away from her, insisting she was very dangerous. Swan thought that this was the only thing he had to worry about, but then it became even stranger when he was sent some cryptic messages. Finding a cryptic message. Ingo Swan's journey into the world of psychic intelligence took an unexpected twist with something shocking. After years of working quietly on remote viewing tasks for government handlers, like the mysterious Mr. Axelrod, Swan was given a peculiar assignment that wasn't about celestial landscapes or underground bases, but checking his own psychic performance. According to his account in Penetration, Axelrod established a remote viewing accuracy threshold of 65% as the benchmark for Swan's readiness for further contact and assignments. Once Swan consistently hit that number in his sessions, Axelrod told him to write 65 on a slip of paper and place it under his desk blotter back at the Stanford Research Institute. This was a signal that his mental eye had reached the desired level of precision. Swan did just that in June 1977. For him, hitting the 65% mark was a personal milestone and a sign that his abilities were robust enough to merit deeper involvement in the secret program. Yet, when he lifted the blotter the next morning, the paper was gone. In its place, there was a fine dusting of powder, and etched into it were two chilling words: "Expect contact." This cryptic message, scrawled in the leftover powder as if by an unseen hand, read like something from a psychological thriller. It marked an ominous turning point for Swan. Rather than simply congratulating him or inviting him to another remote viewing task, the message seemed to reach beyond the mundane logistics of a research project. For Swan, it felt like a signal that something or someone was watching not just his results, but him. The strange note foreshadowed events he described as highly unusual meetings and excursions in the months that followed, blurring boundaries between remote viewing as an intelligence tool and his own psychological experience of being part of something much larger and far more mysterious. This was a strange part of Swan's story, but his life became stranger and stranger, probably because of what he saw on the moon. He made a shocking UFO sighting that made him question everything he ever knew. Encounter in a remote wilderness location. After the 65% accuracy benchmark and the strange cryptic message he found on his desk, Axelrod, ever the enigmatic handler, invited Swan on what he described as a practical observation mission. Swan flew north with Axelrod and two silent companions, traveling by unmarked aircraft to what he perceived as remote Alaska, where an odd journey into the wilderness awaited him. Blind to most details at first, due to the dark and unfamiliar terrain, Swan and the team hiked silently through rugged forest paths. Axelrod emphasized the importance of stillness. "They detect heat, noise, motion like mad," he warned, urging silence before they reached the edge of a small lake. Once there, Swan waited with the others in tense anticipation. Gradually, what began as a simple gray mist rising. From the water transformed into something otherworldly. The fog, Swan later described, shifted into luminous colors like electric purples, reds, and yellows, accompanied by lightning-like discharges that cut through the air without thunder. Then, almost as if materializing from another dimension, a massive triangular craft, approximately 90 feet wide, emerged above the lake's surface, its presence heralded by a low, rhythmic hum. Swan claimed the object remained stationary as ruby-red beams shot outward, striking trees and disturbing the forest. And in one astonishing moment, he watched as the lake's water appeared to be drawn upward into the craft, like an inverse waterfall. Whether Swan interpreted this as some kind of scanning, energy collection, or resource extraction was left to his own speculation, but the immediacy of the event startled everyone present. At Axelrod's whispered warning, the operatives pulled Swan back to safety just as a beam cracked branches, where they had been sitting moments before. Later, on the quiet flight home, Swan suggested to Axelrod that the craft might be an unmanned resupply drone, perhaps linked to resource mining on the moon. Axelrod didn't confirm or deny this, but only replied with a cryptic smile, checking the credibility of Swan's claims. With everything that Swan saw and experienced, experts are wondering how much truth is in Swan's tales and what parts might just be a hoax. Although his tales about psychic espionage, lunar anomalies, and extraterrestrial encounters captivated many people, they also invite serious scrutiny. One of the strongest points in his favor lies in the Jupiter remote viewing experiment. In 1973, Swan described the turbulent storms of the planet, with hydrogen-rich atmosphere and even a faint ring around Jupiter. These details were later confirmed by the Voyager spacecraft. These observations lend a surprising weight to his story, suggesting that his remote viewing output might just be real. But the picture of whether his abilities are real or not become murkier when you move from Jupiter and look at the moon. Swan said he saw machinery tracks, structures resembling airfields, glowing colored lights, and even humanoid beings on the moon's far side are impossible to confirm. No official lunar mission has ever seen these kinds of anomalies, and even the photographs taken of the far side of the moon either show barren terrain or are limited in public release. What's more, his reported wilderness encounter with a massive triangular craft and beams of light, which he interpreted as an unmanned resupply mission mining the moon, similarly lacks independent verification. Remote viewing itself remains highly controversial. While the CIA and other intelligence agencies invested significant resources in testing it during the Cold War, even leading to the Stargate Project, many scientists question whether observed hits were due to chance, selective reporting, or subtle cues rather than actual psychic perception. Even the CIA's own declassified reports were mixed. Some viewers achieved above-chance results, but reproducibility was inconsistent, and conclusions remained cautious. Ever since Swan saw these strange things with his psychic reconnaissance, he has raised a lot of questions about what's really out there. From the strange machines to humanoid figures on the moon, how much truth is in his words? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. So, thanks for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one.